The Longest Day was created in 1962. The movie shares the experience of what D-Day was like from many perspectives. D-Day is the famous day in history where the Allies invaded the beaches of Normandy in World War II. While there were many nations involved in the Allied powers, the main ones included Great Britain, France, the Soviet Union, the USA, and China. On the other side of the war were the Germans, a major part of the Axis powers. After watching and assessing the movie, I have come to the conclusion that The Longest Day fits in the genre of World War II war movies. I came to this conclusion because of the time period and actual content of the movie. While watching the movie, I took notes on the combat authority and purpose. In terms of authority, I noticed that the soldiers in the war respected and admired their leaders. I also took note that the leaders appeared strong-willed and confident when in battle. The authority part of the movie definitely fits the description for a World War II movie. This is the case, as within the movie the leaders are shown as people who care about their soldiers and are seen as role models as well. In fact, in some scenes in the movie, you can see the generals becoming upset with the decisions they have to make over sending their troops into battle. Overall, viewers can tell that figures of authority are respected on both sides of the war. The glorified way in which generals and authorities of figure are portrayed in the movie definitely fit the description for a World War II genre. In the movie The Longest Day, there seemed to be a visual clarity that lasted throughout the entire film. Unlike Vietnam movies, World War II movies seem to represent clarity. Throughout the film, it is easy to tell who was good and who was bad. While the good, the Americans and Allies, seem to be fighting for their country and the bad, the Germans, seem to be fighting to rule the world. In this scenario, the movie clearly favors the Americans and Allies. Throughout the film, I noticed that the combat was very clear. I noted that the Americans could see their enemies, the Germans. I also noted that it was very dangerous as many people were seen dying. I also noticed how every death in war was thought of as a tragedy. Many soldiers and generals appeared to tear up when their comrades were killed in action. Finally, I also noticed that when soldiers were killed, there appeared to be little blood. After watching and analyzing the movie, I noticed repetition of clarity. This led me to believe that the idea of clarity had a bigger meaning. The clarity within the movie represented the moral clarity within people's lives at the time when the movie was released. As well as it is in combat, the idea of clarity is also relevant in the concept of purpose. While in some Vietnam films there appears to be no purpose or negative purpose, the purpose in a World War II film is usually positive. That is the case in The Longest Day. The main goal that we are trying to achieve is to defeat the Germans, and it is this conflict that the movie is centered around. While watching the film, I noticed many French citizens were delighted to see the Americans show up on the beaches of Normandy. In this scenario, the purpose is to free the French from the Germans. As seen here and throughout the rest of the movie, there is a clear purpose. Therefore, the movie should be placed under the genre of World War II movies, as it matches its concepts of purpose, as well as in authority and combat. The Longest Day was released in 1962, meaning that the contents in the movie were influenced by the 1950s. Some of these events included the election of President Eisenhower in 1952, Sputnik 1 in 1957, and Fidel Castro becoming the premier of Cuba in 1959. We will first talk about Dwight D. Eisenhower. He is most commonly known as the 34th President of the United States, but also served as a general in the victorious forces in Europe during World War II. He played a major role in the Cold War as he always tried to ease tensions and prevent war. Although Eisenhower was a mastermind in war, he was always known for wanting to bring peace. In the movie The Longest Day, the figures of authority are modeled after Dwight D. Eisenhower. It almost seems like they are exact replicas of him, as they are all respected, clever, and very confident. But most of all, they are people you look up to in times of hardship. Next, we will talk about Sputnik 1. During the Cold War, the US and the Soviet Union had a so-called space race. On October 4th, 1957, Sputnik 1 was successfully launched into space by the Soviet Union. It was the world's first artificial satellite and was about the size of a beach ball. Either way, the Soviet Union had beaten the US into the space age. This can be related to the film The Longest Day in terms of purpose. After the US had lost the space race to the Soviet Union, a great deal of nationalism was instilled upon every US citizen. They would give all they had to help in the efforts to best the Soviet Union. In the movie, it is very clear why we are fighting the war: to defeat the Germans. In the movie, it shows that by working together, we are able to defeat the Germans in war. The movie shows to the viewers that if the US citizens work together, they will be able to defeat the Soviet Union in the Cold War. On February 16, 1959, Fidel Castro was sworn in as the Prime Minister of Cuba. However, he also demanded that the position's powers be increased. Through his leadership, Cuba was converted into a one-party socialist state under the Communist Party rule. This pitted Cuba against the United States. The U.S. were worried by Castro's friendly relations with the Soviet Union, and they unsuccessfully attempted to assassinate him. This led to a formed alliance between Castro and the Soviets, allowing them to place nuclear weapons on the island of Cuba. This eventually sparked the Cuban Missile Crisis, a defining incident of the Cold War. Just like in the movie The Longest Day, in this situation there was a clear enemy. The purpose was to eliminate the enemy from our worries. Although the Germans were unsuccessful in attempting to rule the world, in the movie The Longest Day, they weren't portrayed as crazy. Instead, they were almost portrayed as if they were US leaders, except just a little bit more stubborn. They're portrayed in this way because during the Cold War, the Western Bloc of Germany was the US's ally,